Welcome to the Thursday cross-reference episode of the Selah Time to Pause podcast from Plexus Salvation Army, an online church in the UK. On Monday, in our walk through John's Gospel, we thought about who Nicodemus thought Jesus was. Today, we cross-reference that story by looking at the time Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" recorded in Luke chapter 9, verses 18 to 22.
One day Jesus left the crowds to pray alone. Only his disciples were with him, and he asked them,
"Who do people say I am?"
"Well," they replied, "some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the other ancient prophets risen from the dead." Then he asked them,
"But who do you say I am?"
Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Messiah sent from God." Jesus warned his disciples not to tell this to anyone, saying,
"The Son of Man must suffer many terrible things. He will be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He will be killed, but on the third day he will be raised from the dead."
I will stop and breathe in your presence. Just breathe. Just breathe.
The passage we're thinking about today is very well known, but perhaps less well understood. On the face of it, it seems as if Jesus is finally getting recognised for who he was. After all, Peter has just come to the realisation that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah sent from God, the Saviour of the world who will deal with the problem of humanity's sin and reconcile the world back to God, undoing the catastrophic fall in Eden and restoring the relationship between God and man. And so you might expect that this will be a pivotal point in the gospel stories. That from this point onwards we will discover a growing understanding amongst the crowds that Jesus was the Messiah. And so we'd see an ever-increasing influence, power and authority being granted to Jesus as he begins to gather his following in light of Peter's discovery now being shared with the world. But we don't see this. In fact, we see the almost opposite. Far from Peter's discovery being now proclaimed by emboldened disciples from rooftops throughout the land, we instead see Jesus tell Peter to keep silent. And this surprising command is the clue that there's something wrong with our initial assumptions. Perhaps Peter, despite his answer, has still not truly understood who Jesus is. You see, we cannot help but read this passage through the lens of our own understanding of the rest of the story. And so when we see Peter respond that Jesus is the Christ, we impose onto his answer our much later contemporary insight of what it means for Jesus to be the Christ, the Messiah. Yet this is not at all what Peter would have meant. Let's not forget that this answer comes after a whole host of other answers were proffered by the disciples, reminiscent of an excited class of 5 or 6-year-olds being asked to choose the name of the new class hamster. In a melee of guesses, Elijah, Isaiah, another prophet, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, even John the Baptist, who they'd actually seen him talking with. And then in the midst of everyone present offering a myriad stabs in the dark and 1,000 theories to try to answer Jesus' question, Peter stumbles into, "You're the Christ, the Messiah." But what did he mean by it? To him, the notion of a Messiah was a political or military figure, the long-awaited, hoped-for leader who would free the Jewish nation from the Roman occupying forces and would be the spiritual successor to King David of old. The Christ would be the one to re-establish the earthly kingdom of Israel and then enlarge its influence to make Israel, God's chosen people, a dominant world force. Peter may have answered with the right words, but almost certainly not for the right reason. So it's surely no surprise then that Jesus tells him not to say anything. Like a stopped clock just happening to tell the right time for that one moment you look at it, Peter gives the right information, but without any of the internal workings to make that information meaningful. Which is why we read right after Peter's blurted out, "Oh so very right, yet also oh so very wrong guess," that Jesus goes on to explain what and who the Messiah really is. The same question as Jesus asked his disciples is also one that comes to each one of us. Who do we say that Jesus is? Who is he to us? And it can be so easy to blurt out a whole host of different answers just like those first disciples. We can even find ourselves giving the same answer as Peter, that we believe him to be the Christ sent from God. Now, we, having heard the later stories of Jesus' life, his betrayal and crucifixion, and also knowing from history that Israel did not become a mighty world power in the years following, may not have the same misunderstanding as Peter as to what it means for Jesus to be the Christ, but we can still fall into the same trap, that of saying the right words but not meaning the right things. Because it's easy to say the phrase, "He's the Lord, the Christ, the Son of the living God," and to sound right, but without taking on board the full import of those words. For if he's your Lord, then it means you have to have surrendered control of your life to him, that you're doing all within your power to follow his rule of life and to live in the way he wants and expects of you. And if he's your Christ, your Messiah, then you need to look to him as the way out of your struggles and the solution to the problems of your life, and find in him the hope for your future. And if he's the Son of the living God, then you accept that he is all of that by right, for he made you and he loves you, and all the gifts and joys in your life come from him. So, who do you say Jesus is? We began this week on Monday by hearing the answers to that question from a whole host of people randomly walking by in the street. But now the question comes to you, comes to Sam, Kate, Roger, Laura, Elaine, Ruth, Peter, Eric, Billy, to each one of you. The question comes, who do you say Jesus is?